Prince Edward Island in 1988 was known for its calm, close-knit communities, where everyone knew their neighbors and violent crime was almost unheard of. On November 12th, that peace was shattered when 36-year-old Byron Carr, a well-respected English teacher at Montague Regional High School, was found dead in his home at 24 Lapthorne Avenue in Charlottetown. To those around him, Carr was a kind, quiet man, devoted to his work and family. The discovery of his body shocked the entire island. Investigators soon learned that Carr had likely met the man who would kill him the night before, in the early hours of November 11th, somewhere in downtown Charlottetown. The crime scene revealed a violent struggle had taken place, and crucially, a message had been left on the wall reading, "I will kill again." This chilling note suggested the killer was not only brazen, but intended to continue a pattern of violence, striking fear throughout the province. In the late 1980s, with no modern DNA databases, the Charlottetown police faced an immense challenge in trying to identify a perpetrator who remained completely unknown, leaving the island with more questions than answers. The day Byron Carr was found, Charlottetown police quickly cordoned off his home, treating it as a high-priority homicide investigation. Officers and forensic experts combed through the house, documenting every detail and collecting physical evidence, including the knife and towel used in the attack. Witnesses were interviewed in the surrounding neighborhood, but very few had seen anything unusual on the night of November 11th. Investigators focused on Carr's last known movements, speaking with friends, colleagues, and anyone he had interacted with in the days leading up to his death. Police suspected that the killer was someone Carr had invited into his home, but without a name or description, leads were scarce. At the time, DNA technology existed, but was in its infancy, and there were no national databases to help match the evidence collected at the scene. The investigation was further complicated by the social climate of 1988, where members of the LGBTQ+ community often feared coming forward, leaving potential witnesses silent. Despite tireless efforts, the case quickly became one of Prince Edward Island's most perplexing mysteries, as the trail of evidence seemed to disappear into thin air. As the investigation into Byron Carr's murder stretched into the late 1980s and early 1990s, the case grew colder by the year. Charlottetown police maintained an open file, reviewing the evidence repeatedly, but the lack of witnesses and the absence of any solid leads left the investigation stagnant. DNA evidence collected from the scene, including skin cells under Carr's fingernails and traces on the towel, was preserved, but at the time it could not be effectively analyzed or matched to any suspect. Officers revisited the neighborhood multiple times, questioning residents about anyone unusual who may have been seen near Lapthorne Avenue, but memories faded and tips were sparse. The impact on the community was profound. Prince Edward Island had always been a place where neighbors watched out for one another, but Carr's murder introduced a chilling reality that danger could touch anyone. The LGBTQ+ community, already marginalized in 1988, experienced heightened fear. People who might have had information were reluctant to speak to police, worried about exposure or retaliation. The message left on the wall, above Carr's bed, stating, "I will kill again," became a haunting reminder of the killer's audacity and further intensified the island's anxiety. Over the next decade, investigators continued to follow any lead that emerged. Cold case units were consulted, and occasionally, tips came from outside the province, but they rarely produced actionable evidence. Police revisited Carr's personal connections, re-examining acquaintances, co-workers, and anyone who had been in contact with him in the weeks leading up to the murder. Despite these persistent efforts, the case remained unresolved, and for Carr's family, the uncertainty was unbearable. The preserved DNA evidence became a silent witness, quietly waiting for technology to advance. By the early 2000s, forensic science had progressed significantly, yet the isolated location of Prince Edward Island and the lack of national DNA comparisons still prevented a breakthrough. The case remained a painful reminder that even in small, seemingly safe communities, violent crime could leave long-lasting scars. The cold years reinforced the reality that solving Byron Carr's murder would require both patience and the eventual intervention of a scientific approach that did not yet exist. The fear and mystery surrounding the murder also had a psychological effect on the island's residents. Parents became more cautious. Students spoke in hushed tones about the tragedy at Montague Regional High School, and the wider community struggled to reconcile the brutality of the crime with the peaceful environment they had always known. For nearly 2 decades, the killer remained a ghost, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a community living in quiet apprehension. Even as time passed, Charlottetown police never closed the case. Evidence continued to be cataloged, and detectives occasionally revisited the investigation with fresh eyes, looking for patterns or missed connections. The hope that science might one day provide answers kept the case alive in both official records and in the minds of those who remembered Byron Carr as a kind and respected teacher. By the mid-2000s, new developments in DNA technology began to offer a glimmer of possibility, hinting that after decades of silence, the story of Byron Carr might finally have a resolution. After more than 3 decades, the investigation into Byron Carr's murder finally gained momentum thanks to advances in forensic science. In the spring of 2022, Charlottetown police partnered with a private company specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. This technique allowed investigators to take the DNA collected from the crime scene decades earlier and compare it with public genealogy databases, looking for distant relatives that could lead them to the killer. By carefully building family trees from these distant matches, police could narrow their search to individuals who fit the profile. The DNA evidence pointed them to one key person, Todd Joseph Gallant, who also used the surname Irving. In 1988, Gallant was 21 years old and living on Prince Edward Island. Records showed that he had a minor criminal record from the previous year and had moved away from the island shortly after Carr's murder. Over the years, he had lived in Texas and Arkansas before returning to PEI in 2022. The same year, police began their genealogical investigation. Investigators began to track his movements, confirming that he had been in Charlottetown at the time of the murder. With the genealogical work supporting the DNA evidence, police felt confident that they had identified the correct suspect. They also reviewed old police interviews and witness statements to verify that nothing contradicted the emerging picture of Gallant's involvement. In January of 2024, authorities finally acted. Todd Joseph Gallant was arrested in the town of Souris, Prince Edward Island, and charged with first-degree murder in connection to Byron Carr's death. A second individual was briefly detained during the investigation, but was later released as police focused entirely on Gallant. The arrest marked the end of a 35-year-long mystery, bringing the case out of the shadows and giving Carr's family and the island community long-awaited answers. The breakthrough was not only a victory for law enforcement, but also a demonstration of how modern science can solve crimes that were once considered unsolvable. DNA evidence, combined with meticulous genealogical work, had transformed a decades-old cold case into a live investigation. Police emphasized that while the arrest brought clarity, many questions remained, particularly regarding motive and the circumstances leading up to Carr's death. The community responded with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Many residents who had lived in fear for decades now had a name and a face to associate with the crime. The LGBTQ+ community, in particular, found some comfort in seeing justice pursued, even though the events of 1988 had left lasting scars. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest was a pivotal moment. Although they had lost loved ones over the years and endured decades without answers, seeing law enforcement finally identify the person responsible provided a sense of closure. Yet the emotional impact of the crime and the long wait for justice remained deeply felt. The breakthrough in the Carr case also served as a reminder of the evolving nature of criminal investigations. Techniques that were unavailable in the late 1980s had grown into powerful tools capable of revisiting old evidence and uncovering truths long hidden. For investigators, the success of the case reinforced the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining diligence, no matter how much time had passed. Following the arrest of Todd Joseph Gallant in January of 2024, the wheels of justice began to turn. Gallant was formally charged with first-degree murder and interfering with human remains in connection to the death of Byron Carr. In October of 2024, he entered a plea of not guilty in Supreme Court, setting the stage for a trial that would test both the forensic evidence and the painstaking genealogical work that had identified him. The case drew national attention as Canadians followed the developments in what had been one of the country's most infamous cold cases. As of late 2025, the case remains in pretrial proceedings, with court dates scheduled for various motions. Gallant's defense team has challenged aspects of the DNA evidence, questioning the legality of its collection and the methods used in the genealogical analysis. Meanwhile, Charlottetown police have maintained that the combination of preserved DNA and careful genealogical investigation is reliable and conclusive. They emphasize that the evidence links Gallant directly to Carr's murder, even decades after the crime. For Byron Carr's family, the arrest represents both relief and a bittersweet end to a long chapter of uncertainty. While they never got to see the immediate consequences of the crime in the years following his death, finally knowing the identity of the perpetrator has provided a measure of closure. The decades of fear, unanswered questions, and the emotional toll of living with an unsolved murder have finally been acknowledged through the legal process. The case also raises broader questions about motive. Was Carr's murder the result of a robbery gone wrong, or was it influenced by prejudice against the LGBTQ+ community in 1988? Charlottetown Police Chief Brad McConnell has stated that understanding the full context and motive remains a priority for law enforcement, emphasizing the importance of uncovering the social and personal factors that led to this tragic act. The arrest and ongoing legal proceedings have renewed public interest in cold cases across Canada. Investigators hope that the success of the Carr case, solved through modern forensic and genealogical methods, will inspire renewed attention to other unsolved crimes. It demonstrates that no matter how much time has passed, justice can eventually be pursued, and evidence can speak even decades later. Community members have reflected on the lasting impact of the crime. For Prince Edward Island, a province often seen as peaceful and safe, the murder of Byron Carr remains a stark reminder of vulnerability, fear, and the importance of vigilance. Yet the case also illustrates the resilience of a community committed to seeking justice, no matter how long it takes. The story of Byron Carr is one of tragedy, perseverance, and the slow march of justice. While the scars of the past cannot be erased, the combination of determined investigators, advanced science, and community support has finally provided answers that were once thought impossible. It is a testament to the enduring power of persistence in law enforcement and the relentless pursuit of truth. Even as the legal process continues, the legacy of Byron Carr and the resolution of his case offer hope that no crime, however cold or forgotten, is ever truly beyond the reach of justice. The haunting questions of 1988 are slowly being answered, closing a chapter of fear and uncertainty for the people of Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island, in the early 1980s, was known for its quiet charm, green fields, and close-knit towns. Kelly's Cross was one of the smallest parishes on the island, home to just over 200 people. Life there moved slowly, guided by the church, local schools, and small family businesses. Residents relied on one another, and doors were often left unlocked. Safety and trust were a part of daily life, making any violent crime almost unimaginable. At the center of this tiny community was Reverend Clarence Roche. He had served as the parish priest for over a decade and was well known for his kindness, compassion, and dedication. Parishioners described him as approachable and warm, always ready to help, whether with counseling, community events, or guidance to young people in the parish. His laughter and storytelling were familiar comforts to everyone in Kelly's Cross, and his rectory, a large house adjacent to the church, was a hub of both spiritual and social life. Reverend Roche was more than a spiritual leader. He was a friend, mentor, and steady presence in the lives of his parishioners. People came to him for advice, support, and sometimes just for conversation. He attended local gatherings, helped organize church activities, and knew almost everyone by name. His life was intertwined with the community in a way that made Kelly's Cross feel like a single, extended family. By July 1981, the summer heat had settled over the island, and the parishioners were preparing for annual local events. The rhythm of church bells, school activities, and weekend markets gave the town a comforting routine. Violence, especially something as extreme as murder, was virtually unheard of. Residents assumed that the safety they enjoyed would continue indefinitely. But beneath the calm and green landscapes, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the sense of security in Kelly's Cross. Reverend Roche, a man who had dedicated his life to peace and guidance, would become the victim of a crime that stunned the island. This was not just an attack on one individual. It was a blow to an entire community, one that would leave long-lasting scars. The story of Reverend Roche begins with the everyday life of a peaceful parish and a man deeply embedded in it. Understanding the harmony of Kelly's Cross helps illustrate the shock and sorrow that would ripple through the community following the events of July 20th, 1981. The loss of such a central figure would mark a turning point, changing the way the residents viewed their own safety and the quiet world they had always taken for granted. As the sun rose on that fateful day, no one could have predicted the darkness that would soon descend on this small, trusting community. Reverend Roche's life, so entwined with the parish, was about to be tragically cut short, and Kelly's Cross would never be the same again. On the morning of Monday, July 20th, 1981, the quiet parish of Kelly's Cross was shaken. Reverend Clarence Roche did not appear for his usual morning duties at the church, and a growing sense of worry swept through the small community. Friends and neighbors, concerned for the priest's well-being, went to his rectory to check on him. What they found inside immediately confirmed their worst fears. Reverend Roche had been violently killed. The scene inside the rectory suggested a home invasion. Furniture was disturbed, and signs of forced entry indicated someone had broken in during the night. The method of the attack showed an alarming level of aggression, leaving investigators with the difficult task of piecing together exactly what had occurred. Law enforcement was called immediately, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with local officers, arrived to begin one of the most serious investigations in the island's history. News of the priest's death spread rapidly. For a community accustomed to peace and familiarity, the idea that a killer had entered their midst was almost impossible to comprehend. Residents felt a profound sense of vulnerability. The security they had always relied upon had been shattered. Families who had grown up with Reverend Roche as a central figure in their lives were suddenly faced with the reality that tragedy could strike anyone, anywhere, even in their own homes. Investigators began gathering evidence and interviewing anyone who might have information. The focus was on understanding how and why this crime had happened, and whether the perpetrators were strangers or from the local area. Early leads pointed toward a robbery that had escalated into murder, but police remained cautious, emphasizing that the case was complex and that every detail mattered. Every visitor to the rectory, every neighbor who might have seen unusual activity, became a potential witness in piecing together the events of that night. The parish was paralyzed by fear. Kelly's Cross, with its small population and tightly woven social fabric, was now a place of suspicion and unease. People questioned how 3 young men from their own community could commit such a violent act, and the trust that had defined daily life began to erode. The investigation revealed that the suspects were local, not outsiders, which intensified the shock and grief. For residents, the notion that danger could exist in their familiar surroundings was deeply unsettling. In the days following the discovery, law enforcement worked tirelessly to collect physical evidence, interview family members and parishioners, and reconstruct the timeline of events leading to the murder. The RCMP focused on identifying anyone who might have had access to the rectory or known the priest's routines. Every corner of Kelly's Cross was examined, and the small community found itself under the intense scrutiny of a criminal investigation for the first time in living memory. By the end of the first week, the investigation had produced its first significant breakthrough. Police arrested 3 young men from the local area, 2 of whom were teenagers and 1 in his early 20s. The news that the perpetrators were members of their own community sent a second wave of shock across the parish. The crime was no longer a distant horror. It was a betrayal by those who lived alongside them. The arrest brought both relief and disbelief. The people of Kelly's Cross were stunned that violence could come from familiar faces, and they struggled to reconcile the image of the suspects as ordinary youths with the reality of their actions. The investigation continued with intensity as law enforcement prepared for a trial that would answer questions about how and why this tragedy had unfolded in one of Prince Edward Island's most peaceful communities. Following the arrests of the 3 young men in July of 1981, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police intensified their investigation into the murder of Reverend Clarence Roche. Officers meticulously examined the rectory, documenting evidence and retracing the movements of the suspects on the night of the crime. Each piece of evidence was carefully catalogued, from fingerprints on the doors to objects disturbed during the break-in, in order to build a clear timeline of events. Witness interviews expanded beyond immediate neighbors to anyone who had been near the rectory or seen unusual activity in the parish over the preceding days. The community of Kelly's Cross struggled to process the reality that this crime had been committed by local youths. Rumors circulated, and a pervasive sense of fear and mistrust settled over the small parish. Parents became hypervigilant, questioning who could be trusted and how to protect their families. Local schools held discussions about safety and responsibility, and church services became both memorials for Reverend Roche and opportunities for parishioners to support one another. Despite the shock, the people of Kelly's Cross showed remarkable resilience, determined to maintain the sense of community that had been challenged by such violence. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement began piecing together the suspects' motives and planning. Police concluded that the crime had begun as a robbery, but quickly escalated due to a combination of opportunity and panic. Each suspect's background was examined closely, including school records, prior minor offenses, and social relationships, in order to understand how 3 young men from a quiet community could commit such a violent act. Investigators discovered that the suspects had been familiar with the rectory, its layout, and Reverend Roche's routines, which suggested that the crime was premeditated at some level. Evidence collected at the scene played a central role in shaping the case. The RCMP gathered physical items, including fingerprints and clothing fibers, and cross-referenced them with the suspect's possessions. Police also relied heavily on witness statements, including observations from neighbors who had noticed suspicious behavior in the days before the murder. The combination of forensic and testimonial evidence helped create a detailed picture of the events leading up to the tragedy. Each discovery added clarity to the timeline and strengthened the link between the suspects and the crime. Public attention to the case intensified as details emerged in local newspapers and radio broadcasts. Residents of Prince Edward Island followed the investigation closely, eager for updates on the progress of the case. Editorials highlighted both the shocking nature of the crime and the rapid response of law enforcement. Community members organized vigils for Reverend Roche, paying tribute to his life and contributions, while also calling for justice for the parish and the island at large. The The case became a defining moment for Kelly's Cross and a cautionary tale for the wider province. Legal preparations for trial were underway by late 1981. Prosecutors focused on demonstrating that the actions of the suspects went beyond robbery, showing a level of violence and disregard for life that required accountability. Defense lawyers attempted to contextualize the suspects' behavior, citing age and social pressures, but the severity of the crime made the courtroom proceedings highly charged and emotionally intense. Investigators continued to provide support and testimony, ensuring that the evidence was clear and accessible to both the jury and the public. Throughout the community, discussions shifted to broader questions about youth behavior, accountability, and the vulnerabilities of small towns. Residents reflected on the ways their tight-knit community could have been both a source of safety and a factor in the tragedy, as familiarity may have enabled the perpetrators to carry out their crime with ease. Schools, churches, and community groups began implementing programs and discussions on ethics, respect, and awareness, hoping to prevent future incidents. While grief remained, the parish sought to turn the tragedy into lessons for the next generation. By the end of 1981, the investigation had laid a strong foundation for prosecution. Evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings were all prepared for the upcoming trial. The case had not only revealed the shocking truth behind Reverend Clarence Roche's death, but also highlighted the dedication of law enforcement and the resilience of a small community facing unimaginable loss. While the trial would answer many questions, the lasting impact of the crime was already felt across Prince Edward Island, and the memory of the beloved priest continued to unite the parish in sorrow and remembrance. By the spring of 1982, the case against the 3 young men accused of murdering Reverend Clarence Roche moved into the courtroom. The trial was one of the most closely followed in Prince Edward Island's history, drawing attention from across the province. Courtrooms were packed with community members, journalists, and family members, eager to hear how justice would be served for the beloved priest. The atmosphere was tense, as the crime had left a deep scar on the island and the parish of Kelly's Cross. Prosecutors presented a clear timeline of events, showing how the suspects had planned the robbery and subsequently carried out the violent break-in at the rectory. They relied on both physical evidence and witness testimonies, demonstrating that the crime was not accidental, but the result of conscious decisions. The defense attorneys argued mitigating circumstances, highlighting the suspects' youth and limited criminal histories, and attempted to explain their actions as influenced by peer pressure. Despite these arguments, the strength of the evidence, including forensic findings and consistent witness accounts, painted a convincing picture of responsibility. The trial lasted several weeks, with daily updates covered extensively by local newspapers and radio. Residents of Kelly's Cross and surrounding communities followed every development closely, feeling both grief and anticipation. For many, the courtroom proceedings were a way to regain a sense of justice and closure after the shock of the murder. Community leaders emphasized the importance of observing the trial respectfully, while still supporting the family of Reverend Roche through the difficult process. In the end, the court delivered a verdict of guilty. The 3 accused were convicted of murder, with sentencing reflecting the severity of the crime and the impact on the community. The sentences varied based on each individual's age and level of involvement, but all faced long-term imprisonment. For the people of Kelly's Cross, the verdict brought a complex mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, yet it could never fully undo the harm inflicted on their community or restore the life of the priest they had lost. The aftermath of the trial extended far beyond the courtroom. Families, neighbors, and parishioners worked to heal collectively, supporting one another through counseling, church gatherings, and community meetings. Discussions emerged about youth education, ethics, and community responsibility, aiming to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The murder also influenced local law enforcement policies, emphasizing the importance of rapid response, thorough investigation, and community communication in violent crime cases. For the parish of Kelly's Cross, the rectory remained a symbol of both loss and remembrance. While the building continued to serve as a place of spiritual guidance, it also stood as a quiet monument to the life and legacy of Reverend Roche. Parishioners organized memorials and events to honor his contributions, keeping his memory alive in the hearts of those who had known him. Years later, reflections on the case highlight the resilience of a small community facing extraordinary tragedy. Scholars and journalists noted how the murder reshaped local perceptions of safety, trust, and morality in rural areas. Kelly's Cross became an example of how a tight-knit community could confront profound grief while maintaining cohesion and supporting one another. The lessons learned from the crime informed discussions on prevention, youth guidance, and community vigilance across the province. By the mid-1980s, the immediate shock had lessened, but the murder of Reverend Clarence Roche remained a defining moment for Prince Edward Island. It was a story of loss, accountability, and the enduring power of a community to come together in the face of tragedy. While justice had been served through the legal system, the emotional and social impact of the crime continued to influence the island for decades to come, shaping how residents viewed safety, trust, and the fragility of life in even the most peaceful places. Even decades after the murder of Reverend Clarence Roche, the community of Kelly's Cross continues to feel the effects of that tragic day. The crime left a permanent mark on the parish and on Prince Edward Island as a whole, serving as a stark reminder that violence can reach even the most peaceful and remote communities. Residents often reflect on how the murder challenged their sense of safety and trust, and how it changed the way the community interacted and looked after one another. In the years following the trial, local schools and community organizations began implementing programs focused on youth awareness, conflict resolution, and ethics. The case of Reverend Roche became an example of how seemingly ordinary actions can escalate with devastating consequences, and it prompted discussions about mentorship and guidance for young people in the area. The parish itself strengthened its ties with the community, hosting events and memorial services to honor the priest's legacy and to support ongoing healing. Reverend Roche's rectory, though a site of tragedy, has remained a place of spiritual guidance and remembrance. Parishioners and visitors continue to leave flowers and notes, remembering the warmth, compassion, and dedication of the priest who had devoted his life to serving others. Local historians and journalists have documented the case extensively, ensuring that the story of both the crime and the community's resilience is not forgotten. Books, articles, and documentaries have examined the murder, the investigation, and the cultural impact it had on Prince Edward Island, preserving it as a cautionary and educational tale. The case also had lasting effects on law enforcement practices in the province. Police and investigators learned from the investigation the importance of thorough evidence collection, rapid response to serious crimes, and engaging the community in the search for justice. The collaboration between RCMP officers and local residents set a precedent for future investigations, showing how a small community could contribute vital information to support criminal investigations. For the family and friends of Reverend Roche, the memory of his life continues to outweigh the horror of his death. Interviews with parishioners years later often highlight the priest's kindness, humor, and unwavering commitment to his community. His teachings and example remain influential, shaping the moral and social values of successive generations in Kelly's Cross. Memorials and anniversaries provide opportunities for the community to come together, reflect, and celebrate the life of a man whose presence had touched so many. The murder also remains a topic in discussions about crime prevention, community vigilance, and the psychological impact of violent crime in small towns. Scholars and social commentators note how such a high-profile case influenced both local policy and cultural understanding, demonstrating that even in quiet areas, crime can have far-reaching effects on public consciousness. The case continues to appear in discussions of Canadian true crime, serving as a reference point for the challenges of solving homicides in small, tight-knit communities. Ultimately, the story of Reverend Clarence Roche is one of both tragedy and resilience. While his murder was a dark chapter, it sparked reflection, learning, and a strengthened sense of community. Residents of Kelly's Cross have rebuilt their trust and continued their daily lives, carrying forward the lessons learned from the crime and the memory of a man who gave so much to those around him. The legacy of Reverend Roche endures in the lives he touched, and in the collective memory of a community that refused to let fear define them. This case stands as a poignant reminder that even in the face of unspeakable tragedy, communities can heal, remember, and honor the lives lost while striving to prevent similar events in the future. It is a story that remains deeply rooted in Prince Edward Island's history, ensuring that Reverend Clarence Roche's life, service, and the lessons of his death will not be forgotten. Prince Edward Island, in the early 1970s, was a place of rolling green fields, quiet towns, and a strong sense of community. In the small settlement of St. Peter and St. Paul, life moved slowly. Families knew each other by name, and neighbors watched out for one another. The Ellsworth family fit perfectly into this peaceful rhythm. Oivan and Bernadette Ellsworth lived with their young daughter Krista, and often shared their home with Bernadette's sister, Gloria. Their days were filled with ordinary routines: work, school, community events, and evenings spent together in the safety of their home. The family felt secure. Their neighbors were friendly, the landscape serene, and the sense of peace unshakable. Their home had the kind of warmth and trust that small communities pride themselves on. Unbeknownst to them, however, danger lurked nearby. Just across the fields, a neighbor named Ernest DesRoches was quietly building a dark obsession. By 1974, DesRoches, who was 29 years old, had already begun troubling the community with his trespassing and unsettling behaviors. Though known to local authorities for petty offenses, he remained a presence that residents tried to avoid, not fully realizing how close the threat would come to hitting them. The Ellsworths' ordinary life, built on trust and neighborly goodwill, was about to be disrupted in a way that would shock not just their community, but all of Prince Edward Island. The calm of St. Peter and St. Paul, a town where people left doors unlocked and believed in mutual care, was about to be shattered by a neighbor's growing obsession. This first part of the story sets the stage for a nightmare that began quietly, in broad daylight, with a family that never imagined the danger staring at them from just beyond their front yard. By 1974, Ernest Joseph DesRoches had become a familiar but troubling figure in St. Peter and St. Paul. Locals described him as unpredictable, often appearing where he shouldn't be and observing families from a distance. Reports to authorities over the previous years had documented incidents of trespassing and theft, but none suggested the extreme danger he would soon pose. DesRoches' behavior was escalating, and the Ellsworth family quickly became the focus of his attention. The family noticed him lurking near their property, watching their movements, and making their quiet home feel unsafe. What had begun as odd encounters now grew into an ongoing, threatening presence. Ivan and Bernadette Ellsworth, along with Bernadette's sister Gloria, realized that their pleas for privacy and safety were being ignored. Concerned for their well-being, they approached the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, explaining DesRoches' history of harassment and his recent obsession with their family. Authorities took the complaint seriously and arrested DesRoches, but he was released shortly afterward due to legal technicalities and the limited nature of his prior offenses. This release proved to be critical. Instead of deterring him, it appeared to fuel his fixation on the Ellsworths. What was once a series of unsettling incidents transformed into a focused and dangerous vendetta. Neighbors were alarmed, and whispers of fear began to circulate through the community. The Ellsworths, once confident in the safety of their home, were now acutely aware that a direct threat had emerged within the familiar streets they had trusted. It became clear that DesRoches' behavior was no longer just a nuisance. It was a serious risk that could escalate at any moment. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change the lives of the Ellsworth family and leave a lasting mark on the history of Prince Edward Island. February 21st, 1974, began as a cold, quiet winter day in St. Peter and St. Paul, Prince Edward Island. For the Ellsworth family, it was a typical Thursday. Bernadette Ellsworth and her sister Gloria planned to attend their regular evening bingo at the Tignish Parish Center, leaving Yvonne Ellsworth at home. Like many homes in the area, their front door was unlocked, a reflection of the community's sense of trust and security. Ernest DesRoches, aware that the house would be empty except for Yvonne, saw his opportunity. He forced his way into the home and confronted Yvonne. In the moments that followed, violence erupted, leaving Yvonne critically wounded. DesRoches' anger and obsession had escalated to a dangerous and deadly level, far beyond the warnings the family had previously reported. As the night progressed, Bernadette and Gloria returned home, unaware of the unfolding horror inside. They were immediately confronted with the consequences of DesRoches' escalating fixation. Bernadette, attempting to reason with him, reportedly asked why he was doing this. DesRoches, however, ignored her words, leaving the family trapped in a terrifying and uncontrollable situation. The aftermath of that night left the Ellsworth family deeply scarred. Gloria survived, but she was left with severe injuries, including permanent paralysis. The trauma extended beyond her physical wounds. She lost her sister, Bernadette, and her brother-in-law, Ivan, as well as her unborn child. That night shattered not only their household, but also the quiet sense of security in the small community. The attack became a defining moment in St. Peter and St. Paul. It revealed how quickly life could turn from peaceful to dangerous, even in a place where everyone knew each other. The horror of February 21st became a pivotal point, demonstrating that one person's obsession could devastate an entire family and send ripples through the entire community. After the attack on the Ellsworth family, St. Peter and St. Paul was gripped by shock and fear. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, alerted by the surviving family members, launched an immediate and thorough investigation. Officers combed the area, collecting evidence from the Ellsworth home and speaking with neighbors who had seen or heard anything unusual. In a small community like this, people remembered details others might overlook, and these accounts were crucial in piecing together the events of February 21st, 1974. Attention quickly focused on Ernest DesRoches, the neighbor who had already been reported for harassment and trespassing. Investigators interviewed him and gathered information about his movements and previous behavior. Evidence and witness accounts overwhelmingly pointed to him as the perpetrator. Within days, DesRoches was arrested, ending his immediate threat to the community, but opening the door to a long legal process that would uncover the full extent of his actions. The trial that followed drew widespread attention across Prince Edward Island. In court, the prosecution detailed the sequence of events that had led to the murders of Yvonne and Bernadette Ellsworth, and the severe injuries inflicted upon Gloria. The case emphasized DesRoches' prior criminal history, including trespassing and harassment, which had escalated into violent action. The defense attempted to argue mitigating factors, but the evidence was clear and compelling. By June of 1974, Ernest DesRoches was convicted of murder and sentenced to 2 life terms. He was also held responsible for the attack on Gloria Ellsworth, which left her with permanent injuries. The community, while relieved to see justice served, was left to grapple with the profound impact of his crimes. The trial reinforced the devastating consequences of a person's unchecked obsession and served as a warning about the potential for danger, even in small, seemingly safe communities. Over the years, DesRoches' time in prison became the subject of ongoing attention. In 1980, while at Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick, he and 2 other inmates took correctional officers hostage in a failed escape attempt. The incident ended tragically, with one officer losing their life during the resolution of the siege. This event further cemented his reputation as a dangerous individual and reinforced the necessity of keeping him incarcerated. The legal and correctional history of DesRoches would continue to dominate conversations about public safety and justice in Prince Edward Island. Parole hearings over the decades reflected both his persistent threat and the difficulty in balancing rehabilitation with community protection. By remaining in prison for over 40 years, DesRoches ensured that he could no longer directly threaten anyone, but the scars he left behind endured in the lives of the Ellsworth family and the memory of the island. The aftermath of Ernest DesRoches' crimes left an indelible mark on St. Peter and St. Paul, and on Prince Edward Island as a whole. For the survivors, especially Gloria Ellsworth, life was forever altered. She faced the daily reality of her paralysis and the loss of her sister, brother-in-law, and unborn child. Despite the trauma, Gloria's resilience became a powerful example of human strength. Over the years, she spoke publicly about her experiences, highlighting the lasting effects of violence and the importance of community support and recovery. The Ellsworth family tragedy also prompted a broader reflection across the island on safety, law enforcement, and community awareness. Residents began to take even small signs of harassment seriously, recognizing that unchecked behavior could escalate into extreme violence. The case emphasized the need for timely intervention and strengthened the relationship between citizens and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. For many, the lesson was clear. Vigilance and communication could prevent similar horrors in the future. Ernest DesRoches remained in prison for decades, a constant reminder of the consequences of his actions. His refusal to participate in rehabilitation programs, combined with his deviant behavior, kept him behind bars. In November of 2020, at the age of 74, DesRoches died of natural causes at Millhaven Institution, a maximum security prison in Ontario. With his death, any lingering fear of him returning to the community ended, though the memory of his crimes remained vivid. The story of the Ellsworth family and Ernest DesRoches continues to resonate in Prince Edward Island. It is cited in discussions about criminal justice, public safety, and victim advocacy. Schools, local organizations, and law enforcement occasionally reference the case to educate the community about the importance of reporting suspicious behavior and supporting survivors. It has become part of the island's dark history, a cautionary tale about how violence can emerge even in the most peaceful places. Ultimately, the case of Ernest DesRoches is a testament to both the fragility and resilience of human communities. While he took lives and caused unimaginable suffering, the courage and endurance of Gloria Ellsworth and the broader community stand as a lasting legacy. The Ellsworth family's story reminds us that even in the face of terrible tragedy, survival, strength, and the determination to protect others can endure. Prince Edward Island, known for its beauty and tranquility, now carries a story of loss, vigilance, and enduring human resilience, one that will never be forgotten.